Now we're live.
Yay, okay. Good evening. This is the October 18th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It's a special meeting tonight. There was no pre-meeting. Will, would you like to start us off? Yeah.
Sure. Chair Levi,
Present.
Vice Chair Barton,
Present.
Commissioner Archibald,
Present.
Commissioner Fairclough,
Present.
Commissioner Bean,
Present.
and our newest commissioner, Commissioner Wheatley.
Present.
Great, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so our first and only item on the agenda is the zoning map amendment, a request to conditionally rezone property located at 30 Buchanan Place from institutional to institutional-conditional zone, CZ. The property is identified as PIN 9648-47-8566 in the Buncombe County Tax Record. The property owner is City of Asheville. The applicant contact is Dustin Clemens, planner coordinating review, Will Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commission. Will Palmquist, Planning and Urban Design. I'll be presenting this conditional zoning petition for McCormick Field. So the site itself is the site of McCormick Field, the minor league baseball field for the tourists, located kind of the southeast of downtown, east of South Slope, and kind of nestled below Valley Street, East End Valley Street neighborhood and the Oakhurst neighborhood. You can see the property and subject property outlined in red, so it's kind of this strange shape with the baseball field and the parking lot that fronts on McCormick Place. Buchanan Place is to the south of the site, and then to the east is Memorial Stadium and Mountainside Park. The site itself is 8 1/4 acres, and the owner is the City of Asheville. So the existing zoning is institutional. You can see the different zoning around the site, including the CBD to the northwest, residential multifamily to the north, and the residential single family to the south. The proposal in the petition before you this evening is to rezone the property to institutional conditional zone. And I'll be getting more into the project proposal and the reasoning for that conditional zoning in this presentation. Future land use as identified in Asheville's Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan is parks and open space, and no change in that is required. So essentially, what's being proposed, and I'll explain a little bit more about the reasoning for the conditional zoning, is that there is a major renovation plan for McCormick Fields passed by City Council through the Capital Improvement Program budget. It includes new clubhouse buildings on the southern side of the site near the right field line, enhanced outdoor seating areas to the north of the site, and an expanded and improved concourse and entranceway to the stadium to the west, as well as some other improvements around the site. Due to that value that's being put into the site, it raises it to a threshold that requires the site to become fully compliant with the zoning. And even under the current conditions, the existing McCormick Field does not comply with the institutional zoning. And there are aspects of the proposed project and just the existing conditions that just restrict the ability of the site to come into conformity with institutional zoning. So this conditional zoning would allow for those technical modifications as needed for the project and for the site to be compliant with the zoning, and then the project would move through the design phase and the construction phase eventually. But this is kind of the initial zoning entitlement being requested by the city to kind of memorialize that zoning and some of the technical modifications. I'll talk through those a little bit more on this slide and the next slides as well. So the institutional zoning district does not have a maximum building height except when this within 100 feet of residentially zoned property or districts. You can see the blue line here shows the extent of that encroachment from the south, which is the single-family zoning district. From the north, and we've requested some updated drawings, but just haven't gotten them for this meeting, it encroaches about kind of through the middle of the grandstand, so a portion of the site from the areas that are zoned single-family to the north. So just to give you an idea of where that zoning is limited to 40 feet in height, which is the height of those zoning districts. This request would raise the maximum height to 60 feet total. There's setbacks required in the institutional zoning district of 15 feet in the front, which is the portion along Buchanan Place, 10 feet in the side and the rear, and then 7.5 feet at the corner of the site, which is identified on the south. So those setbacks are identified on this site plan. There is a technical modification requested to encroach within those building setbacks as well. Landscaping requirements include street trees, street tree again, parking lot, building impact, and property line buffers. The project will comply with all those requirements, but is not able to meet the property line buffer requirement, which basically consists on the southern side of the site where it's single family. It's required at a 30-foot wide planting buffer. So that's indicated in the red where that would be required. And then a 20-foot wide buffer, planted vegetated buffer from the north where it's single-family zone. So those are two other technical modifications that's being requested for this project. Open space is required at 50% of the site, which the project will be able to meet through the inclusion of the actual playing field and seating areas being counted as open space. And tree canopy preservation is proposed to be met on-site through the preservation of existing tree canopy shown in the green on the site plan. So the conditions associated with the project that are identified in the Exhibit E project conditions are relatively standard along with the technical modifications. The one condition I'll talk a little bit about is that there is a proposed traffic control and parking plan, which is basically a way to mitigate some of the traffic and parking issues that arise when there are events at McCormick Field. It's memorializing operations that are already implemented when there are events there and expands on them. It also identifies available parking lots and other amenities to show that there is really within, I believe it's a 10-minute walk of the field, a really sufficient number of parking spaces. That is an item that will be approved by the city engineer. It's subject to change. It's kind of a living document, so it can be updated as operational needs change or parking becomes available or unavailable in the future. And it's just required that that document be followed, essentially, and that's going to be a requirement as through that project condition document. The second bullet outlines all the technical modifications, some of which I've spoken about, others I'll speak to now. The first being that maximum building height would be 60 feet, where it's otherwise limited to 40 feet within that transition area. The elimination of the requirement for the building setbacks. The elimination of the requirement for the landscape buffer, as outlined below, and about the linear extent of those buffers that would be required. There's a significant reduction in the minimum required parking spaces, which would be required to be 34 spaces on site, which is basically that existing surface parking lot at McCormick Place, where 1,000 spaces would technically be required based on the number of seats at this stadium. And that ties into that traffic control and parking plan as well to show that there is sufficient parking and operations to handle parking off-site. There is a technical modification for the parking spaces where they're located, where they're technically prohibited from being within that 15-foot front yard setback off of McCormick Place. So this would allow that parking lot to exist where it currently exists today. And then finally, that there would be no landscaping screening or material requirements for the interior facing retaining walls that are basically part of the creates the bowl that the stadium sits within and where the outfield walls are, since they be interior facing and structurally or visually at least part of that outfield wall structure. They're asking for basically an allowance to not have to landscape screen them or have a specific material designated for them. This project was reviewed by the Technical Review Committee on Monday, October 16th, and was approved with conditions. It is scheduled for City Council review tentatively next Tuesday, the 24th. So staff finds that the project is overall consistent with the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, including the future land use category of parks and open space, which talks about those areas of the city offering a wide variety of different park facilities, active and passive open space, greenways, et cetera, and that as the community needs and new parks and maintenance be required to serve areas of the community in an equitable fashion. The project also supports at least 2 goals in the plan, including promoting access to well-maintained parks and open space for all, and enhancing and celebrating Asheville's unique places and destinations. Staff recommends approval of the proposed conditional zoning request along with the attached Exhibit E project conditions. I'm glad to answer questions. You also have members of the project team from the city with us this evening who can probably answer more detailed questions about the project itself as well.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. Would any of the commissioners like to ask any questions or make any comments?
Yes, thank you, Will, for your work on this. One of my questions was about the new proposed, like the redoing of that surface lot outside. I mean, it looks like that's in those 34 spaces, it's going from what was 9 to 2 ADA spaces. I mean, is that?
So I think the current plan, I don't know if the site plan is updated with the current count. Essentially, the project team is considering increasing the number of ADA accessible spaces within that existing surface lot at McCormick Place, and that would reduce the overall number since you have to have the aisles and that sort of thing. Right. So they're basically that number of 34 is kind of a low number to ensure that if they do decide to do at least 10 ADA accessible spaces, then they'd be able to meet the overall threshold for that required parking.
Okay.
So I believe the current thinking is they'd be providing around 10 accessible spaces.
Plus the 7 or so listed on Buchanan Avenue down there, I think from the traffic report. Yeah.
Right. And there are additional parking areas around the site that are city-owned property as well. And those are not memorialized in this site plan as they're not technically part of the conditional zoning, but they are captured in that parking plan, correct?
Thank you. Another question was on the parking plan, the list of businesses for off-site parking. I mean, is that something like those businesses have committed to, or is there any reason that that business couldn't just change their mind and put up a no parking sign on event days, or is that like how does that relationship work? Maybe that's a question for the.
Yeah, it's certainly a good question for the applicants to speak more about who put that plan together. I think the parking plan can be amended as needed. So if parking lots do go away or aren't available publicly anymore, the plan can be updated to reflect that. I think the approach that the city has taken with this conditional zoning and their minimum required parking is in response to that kind of concern that while there might be a certain number of parking spaces within 500 feet, I believe 500 feet of the site to count for the parking requirement, it would could potentially those parking lots go away, then the site would technically be not compliant with the zoning. So rather than try to, I guess, squeeze every last space out of the potential radius allowed by the zoning, the approach was more to capture the on-site spaces and then put together a plan that can be a little more flexible and responsive to changing conditions, which is likely in the future, as opposed to putting the site in a bind at some potential future date.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I could follow up on that ADA, because I did note that there were some along there on Buchanan, and I thought that only 2 in this new revamped, I should say, parking area off of McCormick seem thin. Obviously, the existing ones on Buchanan plus the two new ones is the intent to be able to meet it, plus perhaps some others that become designated in the parking lot that is to the south of this that then kind of leads towards Memorial Field. Is that correct? Or is the intent to put the ADA down in this revamped parking space? Because then I wonder what that does to the front here with the proposed retaining wall, and how do you get, obviously access up from that lot?
Right. I think the intent is to have around 10 ADA spaces in the actual surface parking lot.
Okay.
I'm going to let the applicant team speak a little more to the accessible routing that would require to get to the stadium.
Yeah.
It's probably that might be a design detail that hasn't worked out fully yet, but yeah, so this plan showing the 2 would be out of date, and it would need to be updated to show that 10, since that's the current direction that the project team is working on.
Okay. Just another, it's not necessarily a comment, more of a question. It would seem that even though the new proposed clubhouse building is 60 feet from what is calling the concourse level, so using that as the datum line, it's going to be closer to the 40, if not perhaps under 40, on the side that really faces the residential area due to the grade. Looking at the elevation markers on the drawing that was provided. Is
Right.
that reasonably correct?
I believe that is accurate.
West side is like 20 and 60 on the south side 20.
Yeah.
It's actually even more dramatically, tucked into that hillside more.
Yeah, mostly because of the grade, so.
Yeah.
Again, not necessarily a question, more of just trying to clarify
Mhm.
what that was, so. All right, and again, these parcels are out of the CZ, but the 3 Hunt Hill Place now has been transferred over to the My Daddy Taught That organization, correct?
That is correct.
And again, this is starting to get outside of it. Where is the line of where that is versus the 55 Hunt Hill? Is it right at the building?
We can
I
certainly
went
take
up
a
there
look
today
at
and it just
that.
all seems to kind of bleed in together, which a lot of these parcels do, especially when they're owned by one entity, but
Yeah, there's an existing parking lot, and that's
Yeah.
where 55 starts, and
Must
then we
be
have a
right.
shared parking agreement with, my daddy taught me that. But
Yeah.
there are some parking spaces that go with that building, and we conveyed that whole building, they own it.
yeah.
So, but
parking
we
on
do
that
have some
more west.
spaces, that we're gonna have a shared parking plan when they have events and things.
Yeah.
And then we have the lower parking lot, one's a paved, and then lower is like
Yep.
and Chris could probably point this out even better, but just see where we park, there it is. See how where all the cars are?
Oh, yeah,
That's ours.
Yep.
That's
There's
55.
okay, that's the,
And, yeah, we'll have an
doing that right
agreement,
there
and then we
will
have
give me
that
the line,
lower
that's what I was
parking
looking
lot.
for.
Yep,
Was just trying to understand that a little bit, okay, thanks.
you're welcome.
And so how is that lot connected to the baseball field currently?
So there is, I believe there's currently a path, and that path would be maintained.
It's
Um,
gravel.
A mix of materials, you can see it on the site plan here as well.
Is there a plan to make that more stabilized gravel?
It's more asphalt.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that connection there. That's mostly for,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, good call. I'm Chris Coral, I'm Community and Regional Entertainment Facilities Director with the city. And yes, so it's actually a little bit noted. So you can see where the path goes up and where there's a hard line on it. That's where it transitions from asphalt to gravel. That's once it gets up to grade where Memorial Stadium level is. And so that would be maintained and possibly expanded just because of the type of vehicles that we would need to get in and out of the stadium from that site.
So I guess I'm wondering, for accessibility, can someone potentially move to the other side of the facility?
That would be a non-public entrance. That would just be a back-of-house space only.
But there's some additional concessions back there,
Oh,
correct?
yeah, so inside the facility, you could go 360 accessibly.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And so is the structural renovations included as part of this CZ? Because it's not fully defined in the description, the project overview, because I know over the years I've heard that come before committees,
So,
the existing building renovations.
so basically, the final design of the project would need to be substantially conformant or compliant with this adopted site plan. It's going to be
Right.
incorporated into the ordinance that will get adopted. So it's still conceptual at this stage, but as long as the final design does not deviate dramatically from that. This is not technically a level 3 project. So most of the conditional zonings we review are because there are certain size and very specific site plan requirements are needed. This is not technically one of those types of conditional zonings, so that's part of the reason why the plans are conceptual, more in nature. But they would need to become relatively and substantially complying with this site plan as presented tonight.
So what is the plan for staging and that sort of thing, since that was mentioned in the?
For construction staging?
Yeah, in the comments.
Our construction manager at risk will be approved at the 24th council meeting this month, so we don't technically have one on board, but the proposal they gave us looks like we would be doing staging at the lot in front, which is, I can't remember the address, but the parking lot right in front of the stadium. And there will be times when we're working at the front of the stadium, they might need to do some staging off to the south side in the Memorial Stadium parking lot. It'll just have to shift a little bit, but the goal is out front, not back in the neighborhood.
Okay. And then the other question regarding the traffic plan, I noticed that there wasn't going to be any representation maybe like along Charlotte Street. Is that's curious to me, because it seems like you have to know where you're going and then be greeted with someone. So I was just curious if any thought was given to maybe someone.
What do you mean, like representation, like a
Like
traffic control person
yeah.
out in Charlotte Street?
Yeah.
We don't currently operate that even on the larger events there.
Yeah.
I would argue it's not really necessary.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm sure as we go through time, we did commit in that parking plan to review it with neighborhood representatives and the city's transportation department annually, so we
Yeah.
can make adjustments for it and make sure that we keep adjusting as we have. I think the plan's been adjusted twice in the last 2 years, so like we keep changing every time that we can to help the neighborhoods out the best we can with what we can do and can't do.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Anybody else?
Got a few other things I wanted to follow up on. Since you're zoomed in right now, that back road, I noted one of the concerns, and this is also kind of a functional aspect given where your dumpsters are. One of the concerns that came up in some of the public, or in one of the public comments at least, was the dumpsters and the access to those. And I am curious as to how you're going to get the trash from the field to those dumpsters if the intent is to, it doesn't appear now based on this site plan, what I'm seeing, but if the intent, or I guess I would say, I will say this strongly, would you be willing to develop that road as a way to at least get the trash from McCormick Field up to the dumpsters as opposed to having to take it all the way around and up through a residential neighborhood at 11 p.m. or something like that?
Actually, that's exactly how we do it currently. So
Okay.
it gets put in the back of a gator or a pickup truck and goes up that road and put in the dumpsters
Okay.
currently.
Okay.
And we're working to, right now it's 4 or 5 8-yard dumpsters and then some 8-yard recycling dumpsters. So we're working to get a compactor up there. So in this renovation, we would have power so that we can have a compactor, which would greatly reduce the number of times per week that there's a trash truck coming up there. They don't have that option yet for recycling, but it would for the trash side. And that would be the goal still. We would go up that road to the dumpsters, wherever their new location is, based on power there each night. And it's been operating like that since the 90s.
Okay. My other question is regarding the retaining walls that are on the, let's see, that is the south side, so kind of coming around from where the new proposed bullpens are, and then wrapping around that side, which is the Memorial Stadium parking area. What I'm understanding.
2 fingers, Chris, and kind of scroll around.
Yeah.
Ah,
Press
fancy.
the 2 fingers. You'll-
Yeah. So what I'm understanding there is there are, I see, obviously there's an 8-foot wall in front of the bullpen. I see that, and then increasing, obviously, as the slope increases. And then there's some distance of terrace between then another maximum 20-foot height wall. And I understand that in the conditions, it's listed, and Mr. Palmquist even mentioned, condition to not have any landscaping along those. I can certainly see the idea of not having that on the one that starts at the field, obviously for advertising. I would highly encourage the city to rethink not vegetating the upper wall as a way to put their sustainability mouth there and vegetatively screen that wall. And I realize that that would be vertical vegetation that is on the wall, but I would highly encourage that.
Not sure what exactly vegetating the wall means. That's outside of my world. But so yeah, you have the outfield wall that, like, I don't know, the different coloration, that's the outfield concourse, and then
Yep.
you'd have the retaining wall, whatever that is. The goal is actually to fix advertising on both. So
Okay.
you'd have tiered advertising. I don't think there's a reason we couldn't have vines or something like that on that wall as well. but-
Alternating, yeah, I think that would,
Yeah.
I think that is a missed opportunity, and I mean, we're always up here looking at walls, and this one is within a ballpark, so it's somewhat different visuals, but I still think that it would just go a long way towards, at least having something there. Is the intent that that is all concrete along there,
I don't think we've. got
between the
that.
2 walls?
Yeah, we don't know yet.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. It doesn't look like there's representation. I looked back through to 2013 Greenway Master Plan, so if it's irrelevant, please let me know. But on that master plan, it looked like there was a greenway called Town Branch Greenway that was traveling from basically Choctaw to, is it Southside or Ashland, up Short Cox Avenue to Biltmore, and then on around the stadium. And I don't see that identified on this plan. I didn't know if that was intentionally excluded or if I'm overlooking it.
I'm going to hand that one to Dustin.
Hey, y'all. Dustin Clemens, I'm a program manager with the city's capital projects department. What you're referring to is what we call the Greenway Connectors project. It's a City of Asheville and NCDOT collaboration project to build on-road connectors between greenways, some that are currently built and some that are not quite built yet. But we are coordinating the design of that with the design of this McCormick Field project as well. So we've shared the CAD drawings between the 2 plans, and we're going to try to coordinate those as closely as we can.
Okay, is that something right now that's being looked at kind of along Buchanan Avenue? And I mean, why it may be relevant is that, we are asking for the modification of the buffer zone between that single-family zoning and the stadium itself. And it's just an interesting connection that could be happening there, I guess.
Currently, the Greenway Connectors project comes up Buchanan Place and stops at about the entrance to McCormick Field itself right now. It doesn't actually go through the parking lot that services Memorial Stadium. But again, we are coordinating that sidewalk, widened sidewalk project with this one as well. There is going to be some overlap, so we anticipate that there will be some design modifications on the very end of that project. But neither of those will really have any impact on the buffer that we're proposing for this project.
Makes sense.
So what I'm wondering is, would it be necessary to have a condition speaking to that coordination with the plan? Because we have seen that in the past. I don't know if it'd be worth mentioning or. Yeah, so normally there's a condition where, dependent on, a future, greenway plan or NCDOT widening or, that sort of thing. We've seen that as a condition as in the CZ to include that. And so I don't recall that one being included. Is that kind of what you're wondering, if maybe that could be
Yeah, it
added?
could definitely make sense. I mean, we have a couple of bullet points here, and just having that kind of intentionality, it may help the neighbors feel like, even though it's not a formal buffer, it's like a handshake to, pedestrian traffic in that transitional space.
Sure, from the applicant's perspective, I wouldn't object to that condition at all, but it's a project that the city, both projects are being managed by the city of Asheville. So we are, of course, going to coordinate with ourselves between the two projects. But if it's a condition that, I certainly don't object to that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to address some of the public comments that we
Okay.
received. I don't see anybody here for public comments, so I just wanted to make sure I caught it while I was thinking about it. We did receive several public comments from people who live along Hunt Hill Place, and so in case anyone's listening or listens to the recording, certainly understand your concerns. I will say that a project like this is similar to a lot of projects, and I will reference a particular type, hotels in the downtown area that have come before this commission where they are meeting their parking requirements off-site. And those off-site parcels are not included within the CZ for the project site. And that was one of the comments that had come up in these public comments. The other I just brought up with Mr. Corll is regarding that trash access. And I guess the other is, I hate to say this, and I certainly don't want to be rude towards anyone that lives in that area. It is an urban location, and as much as we all want traffic to work smoothly everywhere, sometimes it doesn't for certain particular times. And there are, things like this traffic management plan. There are noise ordinances. There are things that are in place that work to help mitigate the impacts. So I just wanted to make sure that anyone that was listening or listened later that had made these public comments felt like those had gotten addressed. Specifically to that, I will bring up that condition 7, where it references this traffic control and parking plan, says that the project will generally adhere. I would like to have that generally just crossed out. I mean, that to me just sets up some a little bit of ambiguity. Again, that is one. And then I'll also, while I'm on it, propose that condition 9C say that 30% of the upper right field interior facing retaining wall be vegetated. Does that make sense? So the highest one, 30% of that get vegetated.
So
that
would,
seems a reasonable balance.
So that would kind of follow the requirements for retaining walls as set out in the UDO with the attached vegetative screening definition?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, following whatever section that is with the attached, yeah.
Okay.
Which seems like it would also have to have some kind of base, a slight, at least, I can't remember how those all read, but whatever that section is.
Yeah, it's described as attached vegetative screening consists of stainless steel or other approved vine support structurally integrated into the wall to support vine planting from the above species list. I can probably speak for the project team that removing generally adhere to the parking plan would not be an issue. I think more of that language is trying to get the intent, the idea that the parking plan may change. So I think as long as folks understand that the parking plan might change as conditions change, but the operations will adhere to that.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of was what I was hearing, was that the parking plan could change.
Right.
But the project adhering to that parking plan isn't gonna, that's what that generally seemed like, well, if the parking plan changes and we don't want to change,
Yep.
we don't have to.
Right.
Well, is there a parking plan that's submitted with this? And so if
Yes.
you're referring to the parking plan, then there is no flexibility if you say that's the plan you're going to adhere to.
Well,
So
but the word generally seems to me to be wishy.
guess you could say substantially, you want to keep in mind this parking plan. So as part of the lease, and Chris alluded to it, for years, we've had a parking plan to even get the lease approved. It was a plan that the neighbors all weighed in on. So I assume this is the most recent iteration of that, but I can't even, it doesn't change very much from time to time, but it does change. So I don't know if there's some language that may substantially comply with the.
Adhere to the current traffic parking plan?
Yeah, I just don't know how much it's going to change, and I don't know if there's anything in the new, like a new
current
lease
effect,
negotiation
yeah.
that would require any more major changes.
I think the biggest thing that was in there for the word generally, so Asheville Tourist baseball games, every time we'll hit that plan exactly.
Yeah.
It was more for the events that are at Memorial Stadium. So like we heard loud and clear from the neighborhoods that Pee Wee football is the worst traffic ever out of all the events, no matter what it is, right? And so so we specifically added Pee Wee football on there. But there are times potentially that like Ultimate Frisbee might have more than 500 peak attendance, and are we really going to need 4 attendants and all of this manpower to manage that traffic? And we probably don't. So we wanted to make sure that there was a little bit of flexibility specifically for Parks and Rec outside of Pee Wee football, but we did put any event over 500 people at McCormick and Pee Wee football at Memorial will have to adhere to this every time. So that way these slightly smaller, less impactful events that might have that one little peak moment of time over 500, so we weren't making a commitment for 4 bodies over 12 hours for a 1 hour peak attendance on like Ultimate Frisbee or a youth soccer tournament or something. So we were trying to figure out how we can make that work. But we could still use the word generally and kind of work some other magic in there.
Yeah.
I think that's doable.
I mean, I think the parking plan does say for all events expecting over 500 peak attendees, so you're still following it exactly if you don't apply it for events with fewer than 500. So I think this is the plan references that it wouldn't require it for every event.
Thanks.
On the traffic.
Thank you.
On the traffic control portion, it's not listed, and it's kind of tough because of the location of the property. The property itself doesn't connect to Biltmore. However, just with the proximity of that load in, load out, and the wayfinding at Biltmore and Buchanan, just being a resident more than anything else, I've observed, quite a bit of backlog of traffic right there at Biltmore, and it can be a dangerous intersection because, people on this parking plan are being directed to park at like, I can't remember the name of that. Is it Gastro right on the corner has a substantial amount of parking, and then people being humans like to go across where there aren't crosswalks. I didn't know if, there's.
So we actually began addressing that, I want to say August of this year. So the tourists have started putting a person down at the corner of McCormick and Biltmore on the exit to help force people up to the already designed crosswalks, because what they were doing was taking the shortcut and just going straight across the road. So they're putting people there and not like forcing them, but saying, hey, there's a crosswalk, hey, there's a crosswalk. Because, we didn't want to get into the like grab somebody and don't run across, but send them where they should go, where it's designed to go. I'd have to defer to Larry on how effective it's been, but that started near the end of this current season.
Okay. And yeah, I just didn't know if there was a formal anything to be included there, just because I know it's a real high traffic congested area.
I would think we could easily add that to the we could add that to the parking plan as part of the exit traffic, because this really was focused on entry traffic and where they park and less so on the exit, but we can add an exit section pretty easily before Tuesday.
Yeah, I think they do like the parking lot sign closer to the on-site parking. And when you're coming like north on Biltmore, to see around that corner at the same time as you're thinking to go and park in there, yeah, I think that's where you almost need that representation on the corner so people know to keep moving versus to continue to queue for a parking space that doesn't exist.
Yep. Makes sense.
The plan to have kind of passes doled out to the residents and the certain 3 access points be managed during events, that's a new thing, correct? That's not something y'all have been doing.
It was new this season.
Okay.
So we heard that post-season last year, implemented this season. Definitely effective depending on which side of the neighborhood you're on. And I think a lot of that has to do with which neighbors were willing to actually put the hang tag on their mirror. So I think as we get more buy-in from the neighborhoods, that's going to be a lot more effective. Because if a car just blows by, us chasing them down and then finding out they're a neighbor, we've left a post. And if the neighbors all buy into that program, use their hang tags, it's a lot easier for us to enforce.
Yeah, because I thought that was a great idea, because a lot of the public comment was on the traffic and such. That seems like a great way to manage that if we can get more
And
buy-in from residents on that.
the tourists volunteered that up. They covered the cost and the distribution and helped make sure that was out there. So they were doing like door knocking, one-to-one conversations to get that pass out there and have people understand like what the option was if you took this pass to help. And we were even giving out more parking passes than cars at houses to help cover guests and babysitters and whatever else might be in play. Yeah.
Okay, and then I think along kind of these same lines, one of the other public comments is about, on the traffic plan, it's like image A. You talk about the 60 spaces being used up there by Mountainside, Mountain View Park. I know those are delineated as to the west of that pedestrian path coming down, but some of the complaints were that in reality it becomes that whole, it ends up taking into that public park and stuff, which I get that complaint of, after the game, then the green space is now tire tracks, mud pits. So, is there a way to?
Yeah, so currently, that's accurate because Parks Maintenance had been using the paved portion of the lot, so the tourists weren't able to use that, but now that Parks Maintenance has moved to Thompson Street, we're able to put a lot more of the tourist players and staff up in the the paved portion of the lot next to 300 Hill Place. And part of the Memorial Stadium project, this little part here, the roundabout as I call it, that is actually going to be reclaimed as green space. So that won't be, right now it's gravel, and so we would expand into that. But once that's grass space and green, we will no longer be parking in there. So it'll only be to the left, which is planned north here where my mouse is, as you go through the second access gate just to the left. And I think that's roughly like 18 or 20 parking spaces that will stay gravel that they'll use. But everything to the right will be returned to park space at the end of the Memorial Stadium project.
Yeah, because when I went by today, obviously it was being used for staging for some stormwater stuff, which is fine. It sounds like you are going to that it's going to try to be managed of not letting that overflow into the park space, which seemed to be one of the concerns. Thank you.
I wanted to follow up on Commissioner Archibald's comment about 30% landscape treatment to the retaining wall that's facing the field. Will, you had read a little bit of the UDO. It's my understanding that normally 50% screening is required on a retaining wall, whereas Joe is proposing 30%. Is that correct?
It's essentially an option to meet the requirements for some kind of screening for retaining walls with certain heights. So it doesn't specify a percentage. So it's,
Okay.
I think, for meeting the requirement, it would be 100% typically in some form or fashion. Basically says that, foreground landscaping, so plantings in front of the wall or attached screening retaining walls for sections over 6 feet in height and closer than 35 feet to a roadway is an option. So it doesn't specify a minimum coverage necessarily, it just says that it would be, have the vegetative screening on the wall. So I assume that means all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Did you say if it's near a roadway or any retaining wall?
It differentiates it by height, so I think there's different requirements for if it's 6 feet, under 6 feet. If it's over 15 feet, it should be screens. If it's over 20 feet, I believe there's, regardless of whether it's located near a public roadway or not. So you get to a certain height in a retaining wall, over 20 feet in height, then the screen is required regardless of where it's located. So yeah, that section of code is very complicated. There's a lot of if, ors, ands in there, but that's generally how
Okay.
it works.
Well, and just to clarify, I just pulled it up too. Section 710.5 talks about it, and for a 10 to 20 foot wall, it's 5 foot planting strip at the wall base, attached vegetative screening covering 50% of the wall face. So again, knowing that this one
Thank you
is
for pointing that out, yes.
it's not public facing, and knowing that, you know, there is going to be some advertising on there, which hopefully helps fund the place. I felt like the 30% was a reasonable adjustment on that.
Okay.
Could we add a condition that the Ingalls bullseye be enlarged so it's easier to hit? It's never been hit, and it's just a travesty. Sorry, I have to.
So I don't know if the project team had a thought regarding that minimum vegetative covering on that section wall. It's something that typically for conditional zoning applicants have to agree to be included into the project conditions. You're free to not accept it, and the commission will make its decision with that in mind, but it has to be a mutual decision to include that in the project conditions.
And there's probably some level of maintenance with it, and, you know, then the lease comes into play, so whichever party is going to be maintaining it, you want to consider that.
Yeah.
So, Will, I'm sorry I missed some of what you said, but just to react to the concept of planting vegetation from the top side of the wall, it can certainly be done. You know, we don't have a wall design yet. We don't know yet what the materials are going to be. We don't know yet what type of stormwater management would have to be done at the top of the wall. So it's hard for us to say, yes, that's something we can do without knowing the technical answers to those questions. But I think the concept we would embrace as an organization, both the tourists and the city of Asheville, we would love to explore it. And if it's feasible and if it makes sense, I think we could definitely do it. But to make it a condition and say we must do that, I think is just, at this point of the project, we don't know how we would be able to agree to that.
Okay. We could change, instead of making that condition 9.6 a requirement. I know a lot of times we end up with how do we usually word it? Ms. Ashley could probably look back.
To the extent feasible.
To the extent practical, yes, I think that's typically, yes, thank you.
Well, you'll look into it. And
Yeah, to the extent possible, and really I am talking about just that, so, you know, that's the field, not this one, but this wall.
Sure.
Yeah, because obviously, I mean, I'm not gonna have the outfielder try to run in and grab the ball. I mean, that would be highlight reel for sure, but.
Just from random, a question based on like the vision, I guess.
Sure.
So we have, let's call it an entire outfield of this top wall, right?
Yeah.
Are we thinking like the top 30% all the way around, or 30% coverage of the
30%,
total
so
wall?
yeah, the vertical, yeah, the, my
Attached to the
understanding is
wall
way yeah.
physically.
So
Like-
there's this thing in baseball called the batter's eye. It's like the green monster, some people know it as in
Yes.
center field.
Yep.
In theory, there might be a way to cover that center, like that whole, I think it's what, 50 feet wide?
Yeah.
80, the batter's eye, 80 feet wide.
Yeah.
So there could be coverage in like the center 80 and then none on the outside, left and right field walls, potentially. The discussion we were having is, one, how do we do it without it being invasive vines, which Dustin tells me is definitely possible.
Yep.
And how do we have the vines grow and everything? So like Dustin mentioned, I think us and the tourists are in, it's just a matter of how we would maintain it and where it all falls. But it might not be 30% across the top all the way around, it might get centered.
I'm thinking 30%, in other words, if there's
Total.
1,000 square feet of wall space, 333
However
square
we
feet.
so desire.
Wherever.
Okay,
And I think the green batter's eye would be perfect.
gotcha.
So, yeah.
Thanks for
To the extent
clarification.
possible, then,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, is how it should read.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Corinne, you thinking? Okay. So does this go for public comment in addition to what was?
Yeah, we should open
said?
up for public comment
Okay.
officially here.
Let's do that unless applicant, you don't have any more comments? Okay. All right, we'll open it up for public comment at 5:58 PM. And seeing there's no one here to speak, we'll close it at 5:59 PM. All right, so commissioners, do we have any other comments, or would someone like to make a motion?
Sorry, I realized I just had one other thing I wanted to
Okay,
ask
go
about.
ahead.
I'm happy to make a motion after that, though. So I realize at this level for most CZs, we don't necessarily have to see elevations of buildings. However, really wish there was something a little more than what I will say is 3 lines on each one of these elevations with materials to match, because when I look at the front of McCormick Field, all I see is brick, and it's a giant brick wall, and I'm hoping that this is not just going to be a giant brick box, that if it's offices, there's got to be windows in it somewhere. So I'm really trusting that this is going to look like something and not just a big giant brick box. So that's my only comment, and if anybody else wants to make a motion, that's fine, but I am happy to do it. Someone else is
Take it away.
chomping at the bit. Okay. Excuse me. I move to approve the conditional zoning request for the property located at 30 Buchanan Place from institutional to institutional conditional zone, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community, in that the request, 1, dedicates adequate resources to meet the maintenance demands of its existing parks, including sufficient capital and operational funding consistent with best management practices and community standards for a high level of service, and 2, continues to create accessible urban places throughout the city and ensure that downtown services, amenities, and resources are designed to serve residents as well as visitors.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So it looks like the motion passes 6-0. All right. Thank you for your
Thank
time
you.
today, and thank you for the presentation. This is going to council the 24th?
Yes. I'm sorry, who seconded that motion?
Jeffrey.
Thank you. So that's I think the only item on our agenda. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is on November 1st. And unless there's anything else, I'd leave it to you, Chair, to close the meeting at your discretion, or ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.